I'm just going to be explaining the culminating research that I did for my project, so let's get started. So before I start, the hypothesis that I had was that the increased tuition fees for students in Canada has caused a decrease in both international and citizens attending post-secondary institutions, and a more expensive field of study in university has little effect on graduate salary in the future. So the background information that I found, well, first of all, the population and the sample size was international and Canadian students in post-secondary studies. Post-secondary tuition fees are increasing by around 3% per year steadily, with a greater increase occurring at the university level rather than in college. Also, the job market is expanding to a more professional demographic requiring a degree more often. College students tend to be more employable because of the hands-on work experience they get through the process of the degree rather than university students. And it's also unknown if the amount of students are increasing or decreasing, but we will find out, and we will find out why through the research. So first of all, I discussed enrollment trends in my research. You can see that depending on the field of study, the enrollment varies. So overall, I found that enrollment has been increasing over time, even though in some fields of study it has been decreasing. So international students versus citizens attending college and university in Canada. It can be seen that international students attending college in Canada is increasing, and then the correlation coefficient is 0.74, so it has a moderate to strong correlation, and it's also a positive linear correlation, so it just means that over time students have increased rather than decreasing. So international students in a university can be shown as an even stronger correlation coefficient of 0.9. And so this is increasing steadily in a positive linear correlation. And then more international students are attending university rather than college. I also found that there's a large spike of students in university between 2008 to 2012. So overall, the amount of students are increasing. This is a graph for tuition fees for international students versus citizens. As you can see, the international fees are a lot higher than citizens when compared, and they have also been increasing steadily over time. International fees are going up more than student fees that are citizens. So international students pay an average of $17,633 more for their education in Canada than citizens do, and this is because of subsidization from the government. International student fees have risen as a strong linear correlation that you could see from the graph, and similarly to student fees, which have also risen as a strong correlation. International student fees saw a large spike, like I mentioned, in the 2012-2013 school year, and have continued to rise at a greater speed than citizens' fees. Overall, rising fees don't seem to have a large impact on the amount of students, both international and citizens, attending university and college. Like you saw in the graph before, the students are increasing along with the tuition fees. So I wanted to find out why this was. And doing further research, I found that there was an exception to this trend. So students who are citizens that come from low-income families, which is less than $50,000 per year, are less likely to pursue higher education because of low financial support. So students from low-income families are also far more likely to attend college because it's a lot less expensive to obtain a degree that way. So you can see from the graph that only 34.8% of low-income families attend college, and then when compared university and college, there's a lot less of low-income families attending. So this is tuition fees based on field of study for international students. So the average is $25,000 in tuition, and you can see that the most expensive fields of study are things like dentistry, medicine, nursing, things like that. So this is a graph that shows that international students are far more likely to study in fields like business, engineering, and math than Canadian students. So the analysis is that depending on the subject of study, tuition fees vary. The highest fee for both international students and citizens are in fields like dentistry, medicine, law, and engineering. You could see that from the graph before. International students are also far more likely to study in more expensive fields like engineering and university than Canadian students, giving them the highest tuition fees and a likelihood of studying in the most expensive fields. So the number of students studying in these fields continue to rise at a steady rate, indicating that there must be a direct cause and effect when it comes to employment in these fields after graduation, rather than being based on tuition costs, or it would be expected that, depending on tuition costs, the number of students would go down, but it is going up, so tuition doesn't seem to have a correlation with the amount of students attending. So the job market and a reasoning for these trends, I did have to dig a little bit deeper because the research I was finding wasn't making sense, and I really wanted to find that reason behind both of the increases. So this is the correlation between tuition fees and salary dependent on field of study. It can be shown as more of a weak correlation, and it's also negative. So the correlation coefficient was only 0.2, making it a very weak correlation, and then the linear regression is negative. So that just basically means that as the tuition fees in the field of study go up, the salary kind of remains the same. So there's not much of a correlation there. And so that was also strange to me. So I went on to find the correlation between tuition fees and the number of students attending post-secondary institutions. So the linear regression was positive, so it is a positive correlation, but it has even weaker of a correlation coefficient at 0.09. So it's a very weak correlation, but it is positive. So there wasn't really a correlation between tuition fees and number of students attending. And then there was also not much of a correlation between tuition fees and salary dependent on fields of study. So the analysis is that in the first graph there's a weak correlation, in the second graph there's also an even weaker correlation. The negative correlation means that the increased tuition fees in certain fields have no effect on the salary made after graduation. The second graph also shows that there is less of a correlation between the price of tuition and number of students attending post-secondary education. But it also displayed a positive linear correlation, showing that as tuition fees increase, the number of students also increase. So there must be external factors that affect the choice students make to attend post-secondary institutions, other than tuition fees, or it would be expected that the linear regression would be negative, which it is not. So this is the explanation for why those trends are occurring. So as you can see, the Canadian labor market is generally growing in demand for graduate degrees, which means if people want to get professional jobs, they have to have a degree, and that's more so where the job market is going. So that's why more people are attending post-secondary institutions rather than not. And it doesn't matter if the fees are increasing or not, because they need degrees to get jobs now. And you can also see that in the more expensive fields of study like dentistry and optometry and medicine and things like that, there is more of a success rate for employment. So this just shows the percentage of employment after a 2-year period in the graduate's field of study. So as you can see, like all dentists who graduated have a 100% employment rate 2 years after university. And so the trends like that show why these correlations are occurring. So the explanation is that the job market in Canada has extended to more university graduates in recent years. The demand for higher education may also explain the increasing tuition fees as the competition to get into post-secondary institutions become greater. And then the second graph may also explain why there's a stronger yet negative correlation between tuition fees and salary. It explains the negative correlation because it displays that the high employment rates exist in various fields where tuition fees are on both the highest and lowest ends of the scale, indicating that tuition doesn't necessarily have an effect on salary. So these are my conclusions. Overall, the first part of my hypothesis was proven wrong because of the positive correlation between tuition fees and the increasing number of students along with them. It's thought that this is occurring because of external factors of the job market redirecting to a more educated workforce, causing more students to attend university and college despite rising fees. So because of that external factor, it was proven wrong, except for low-income families, which it was proven right because as tuition fees rise for lower-income families, the student does drop overall. And then the second part of my hypothesis was proven correct because of the stronger negative correlation between the price of tuition and salary after graduation. The negative correlation indicates that salary and tuition both move in different directions and do not have that much of a correlation at all, proving the second part of the hypothesis correct. So this result is thought to be because the demand for certain jobs is higher in some fields with various tuition costs resulting in higher salaries because of demand rather than the higher cost of tuition. Despite this evidence, obviously I can't conclude 100% because there were a lot of sources of error in my research and then the different factors that could have skewed the data as well. Also, not being able to analyze important information that was not available to me could have also affected how this project was concluded, but overall half the hypothesis was correct and half of it was wrong, and that's pretty much it.